Step into the Wild West, where legends are born and blood stains the dust. Don't forget to subscribe and ride with us through history's deadliest tales. The Kansas prairie stretched out in every direction, a vast sea of grass broken only by the occasional stand of trees and the thin line of wagon trails carved by restless pioneers. It was a lonely country in the 1870s, silent except for the howl of the wind, the caw of distant crows, and the creak of wagon wheels heading west. Travelers moving along the Osage Trail knew the road was long and treacherous, but they also knew of a small stopping place that promised food, shelter, and a soft bed, the Bender family's inn. To the weary, the sight of the Bender homestead rising from the flatland seemed like a blessing. A clapboard house, weathered by the prairie winds, sat beside a small garden patch. Behind it stretched an orchard where twisted trees clawed at the sky, their shadows crawling long across the grass at sundown. A hand-painted sign promised groceries, meals, lodging. The scent of stew sometimes drifted into the road, drawing travelers toward its door like moths to a lantern flame. The Benders greeted their guests with the uneasy hospitality of frontier folk. John, Pa, Bender, broad-shouldered and rough-faced, spoke in a broken growl of German-accented English. His wife, Elvira, known to the neighbors as Ma, was sterner still, with sharp eyes that seemed to measure strangers as though weighing their souls. Their son, John Jr., awkward and prone to nervous laughter, handled much of the farm work but seemed to drift at the edges of conversation. And then there was Kate. Kate Bender was the light of the family, or so it seemed. Young and striking, with dark hair that framed a clever smile, she spoke better English than the others and carried herself with a confidence rare on the frontier. She called herself a spiritualist and a healer, offering seances, charms, and whispered advice to those who believed in such things. Men, in particular, found themselves disarmed by her charm, lingering long after supper to hear her speak of unseen worlds and the comfort of spirits. To a traveler, the inn felt safe enough. The table was always set, a fire always burning, and Kate's voice gave the illusion of civilization in a land still half wild. Yet there was something off. The shadows in the house seemed to stretch too far, as if they clung to the walls. The orchard's silence pressed heavily on the air, broken at night by odd noises, dull thuds, muffled groans, the squeal of pigs restless in their pen. Some men whispered that the Benders' kindness felt practiced, like actors playing a role, and that the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Still, the inn became a known stop on the Osage Trail. Wagons heading west, traders with full purses, men traveling alone, all paused there. A hot meal, a roof overhead, and the promise of company outweighed unease. Those who stayed often carried gold, cash, or horses, temptations too great for a struggling frontier family to ignore. Neighbors in the nearby settlement of Cherryvale sometimes wondered about the Benders. Pa was surly, Ma was rumored to practice strange German rites in the orchard, and John Jr. spoke too loudly in town, often laughing at odd times. Kate, however, dazzled them. She placed ads in local papers offering her services as a medium, claiming she could heal the sick and speak with the dead. For some, she became the face of the family, young, attractive, trustworthy. But whispers began to grow. Travelers who stopped at the inn were not always seen again. A man riding west would vanish, and his horse might be found wandering. Another would say goodbye to friends in Independence, promising to write, and no word would ever come. On the prairie, disappearances were common. Indians, bandits, accidents. But some neighbors began to mutter. Too many were vanishing near the Benders' place. Inside the house, beneath the hum of conversation and the clatter of plates, darker designs brewed. The long wooden table in the front room was positioned carefully against a curtain that divided the house. Guests sat with their backs to the canvas, laughing at Kate's jokes or listening to her speak of spirits, while behind the curtain, Pa or John Jr. waited. The floorboards beneath held a trap door, cleverly hidden. The walls themselves seemed to lean in, listening, waiting. It was Kate's role to lull them. She would lean forward, her voice soft and inviting, her dark eyes pulling them in. Men trusted her, believed her, wanted to believe her. She spoke of the unseen world, of fortunes waiting, of voices from beyond. And while the guests leaned close, their attention fixed on her smile, a hand tightened on the haft of a hammer just beyond the curtain. The inn on the prairie became a stage, and the Benders its players. Every gesture rehearsed, every smile practiced, every warm bowl of stew part of a performance meant to soothe the weary. But the prairie itself seemed to know. The wind groaned through the cracks in the house like a warning, and the orchard creaked at night as though restless. Those who survived their stay remembered unease, a chill they could not explain. A horse refusing to approach the barn, ears laid back in fear. A child who burst into tears upon entering the parlor. One man, who left abruptly after a single night, swore he heard faint scratching under the floorboards as he tried to sleep. But for others, the inn became their final stop. They vanished into the prairie winds, their names whispered only in taverns and their fates left to rumor. No one yet knew the full truth. No one yet saw the orchard for what it was. The Benders still smiled, still played their roles, and travelers still came down the Osage Trail, weary, hungry, and hopeful. The house welcomed them in with lamplight and warmth. But once the door closed, once the shadows pressed tight against the canvas wall, the Benders decided who would leave alive, and who would not. On the surface, the Bender homestead was nothing more than a frontier way station. But to those who lived nearby, something about the family always seemed unsettling. Neighbors described Pa Bender as a brute of a man. His heavy frame and coarse beard gave him the look of a wolf gone half-domesticated, forced into the role of farmer but forever ill at ease among men. He spoke little, and when he did, his German accent made his words jagged and hard to follow. He was seen in town only when necessary, purchasing supplies, collecting tools, or selling produce from the orchard. Few tried to befriend him. Ma Bender was even less approachable. Short, round-faced, and sharp-tongued, she was known for her temper. Locals whispered that she was a witch. She would glare at children, mutter under her breath in German, and scowl at anyone who lingered too close to the house. She claimed to practice healing arts, but most stayed away, convinced that the woman dabbled in darker things. Hexes, curses, perhaps even blood rites. John Jr. tried to be social, but his attempts fell flat. He laughed at odd times, spoke too loudly, and often made strange jokes that left people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. In church, he muttered to himself, and in taverns, he was prone to bursts of wild, inappropriate laughter. He frightened people without meaning to, his behavior too unpredictable, too strange. Only Kate seemed capable of weaving a different spell. Beautiful, intelligent, and bold, she took to the role of the family's voice with ease. In town, she distributed handbills advertising herself as a spiritualist and clairvoyant. She promised cures for illness, charms for good fortune, and even seances to commune with the dead. Kate wasn't shy about her abilities either. She gave public lectures where she declared that death was merely a doorway and that she could guide others through it. Some dismissed her as a charlatan, but others were drawn in. Farmers' wives sought her for remedies, and men, particularly lonely men traveling the Osage Trail, found her magnetic. Kate's dark eyes and soft smile made strangers forget the endless loneliness of the prairie. She had a way of leaning close, her voice dropping to a hushed whisper, as though revealing secrets meant only for them. Behind that charm, however, lay a darker intent. The Benders were not simply a family of odd settlers. They were predators, bound together not only by blood, but by purpose. The inn was their hunting ground, and travelers were their prey. The plan was cruel in its simplicity. A weary traveler, usually a man with a bulging purse, would arrive at the inn. He would be fed, offered drink, and drawn into Kate's orbit. She would smile, laugh at his stories, and speak of spirits eager to guide him. Then she would invite him to sit at the place of honor, the seat against the canvas curtain. It was a carefully chosen spot. From there, the guest's back was exposed, vulnerable. Beyond the curtain, Pa or John Jr. waited, a sledgehammer in hand. At Kate's signal, the blow would fall. Swift, brutal, final. The guest's head would crumple forward onto the table, a gurgle of surprise all he could manage. Before the blood could spread across the floorboards, the trap door beneath the table would open. The body, stripped of valuables, would be dragged down into the cellar. The prairie covered many sins, and the Benders counted on that. The cellar held more than just tools and food stores. Its dirt floor was damp and uneven, and in its corners lay shallow trenches. Some victims were left there, buried beneath inches of earth. Others were carried out at night, dragged into the orchard, and lowered into hastily dug graves among the trees. The roots of the orchard drank deeply. For months, perhaps years, the plan worked. Travelers disappeared one by one. A peddler heading west, a prospector with a pouch of gold, a father and daughter seeking a new life. Each time, the prairie absorbed them, and the Benders prospered. Horses and wagons were sold off, purses of gold quietly exchanged, and no one asked too many questions. Still, suspicion lingered. Locals began to notice the pattern. Why did so many disappear near the Benders' place? Why did the family grow defensive when questioned? Why did Kate, who spoke so easily of the afterlife, seem so comfortable with death? The Benders brushed it off with shrugs and laughter. The prairie was dangerous, they said. Indians attacked travelers. Bandits roamed the trails. Men were careless and often vanished into the wilderness. But their eyes betrayed them. Cold, watchful, always calculating. It was Kate who held the mask best. She assured neighbors of their honesty, invited them to seances, even flirted openly to disarm suspicion. But her words, recorded later, revealed her true heart. She told one gathering, "Murder is a mercy. It sends the weary spirit to its next home." At the time, people thought it was just theatrics, a spiritualist's flair for the dramatic. In hindsight, it was a confession. The inn stood like a spider's web on the trail, its threads invisible but deadly to those who stumbled into it. Travelers entered seeking rest, never knowing they were prey the moment they stepped through the door. The prairie kept its silence, but whispers grew louder. Families wrote letters that went unanswered. Friends waited for companions who never arrived. Something dark was festering in Kansas, and soon the Benders' secrets would begin to unravel. The Osage Trail had always been a dangerous road. Storms could rise suddenly from the horizon, turning the skies black and the earth to mud. Horse thieves stalked the prairie, and desperate men, broken by hunger or debt, sometimes turned to banditry. But in the early 1870s, the dangers seemed to multiply near one particular stretch of Kansas, where wagons vanished as if swallowed whole by the tall grass. The disappearances started quietly. A prospector heading south never arrived. A merchant traveling west never made it home. At first, no one connected the vanishings. The prairie was vast after all, and men often met misfortune. But then came Dr. William York. Dr. York was no ordinary traveler. He was the brother of Colonel Alexander York, a well-known lawyer and politician in Kansas. In March of 1873, William set out along the Osage Trail, promising to return within days. When he did not, alarm spread quickly. The York family was not the kind to let questions go unanswered. Colonel York rode out with a small party of men, retracing his brother's path. They questioned settlers along the way, asking if anyone had seen the doctor. Time and again, they heard the same answer. Yes, he passed this way. Yes, he stopped at the Benders' Inn. That last part stuck. The Benders had always been peculiar, but no one could quite pin down why. Now, with Dr. York missing, suspicion grew sharper. Colonel York visited the inn himself. He dismounted, dust swirling around his boots, and was greeted by Kate with her usual soft smile. "Your brother?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes, he stopped here. A kind man. He left after supper, said he was headed south. Her eyes, calm and dark, gave nothing away. The colonel scanned the faces of the others, Pa Bender glaring silently from the doorway, Ma muttering under her breath, John shifting nervously. The place smelled faintly of earth and old wood, with something sour beneath. York's instincts told him something was wrong, but he had no proof. Word spread of the York family's search. Other families began to recall their own loved ones who had vanished along the trail. A father and daughter named Launcher, a man carrying a heavy purse of gold, a peddler who sold trinkets. Always the same story. They were last seen heading toward the Bender place. In Coffeeville and Independence, the taverns hummed with talk. Some said the prairie was cursed. Others whispered of bandits. A few dared to voice what others feared to admit. What if it's the Benders themselves? The Benders, sensing suspicion, tried to hold the mask. Kate offered to help with seances, promising to summon the spirits of the missing. Her words dripped with confidence. Your loved ones are safe beyond the veil. Do not fear. Some found comfort. Others found her too eager, her smile too polished. Meanwhile, the trail continued to swallow travelers. Jacob Harlan, a farmer passing through with his team of horses, remembered the inn with a shudder. He'd been offered a seat near the curtain, but something about the way John stood too close behind him set his nerves on edge. He excused himself before supper, claiming his horses needed tending. He left that night, and later told neighbors he felt as if he'd escaped a trap he couldn't quite name. Another man, a trapper named George Newton, wasn't so lucky. He was last seen leading a wagon toward the Bender Inn. Days later, his horses turned up, tethered in a nearby town, offered for sale by a stranger no one recognized. Newton himself was never seen again. The orchard behind the Bender place grew thick that spring. Its branches bent low with blossoms, the air sweet with the promise of fruit. Yet for those who passed, there was an unease in its beauty. The ground seemed disturbed in odd places, as though freshly turned and tamped back down. Colonel York returned to the inn a second time, this time with a group of armed men. He questioned the Benders sharply, demanding to know what had happened to his brother. Pa Bender growled in broken English, insisting they knew nothing. Ma cursed under her breath, calling York a fool. John laughed nervously, his laughter ringing too loud. And Kate, always Kate, stepped forward with a calm that bordered on defiance. She told York that his brother's spirit was at peace. She even offered to conduct a seance for him to prove it. The colonel left that night with rage boiling in his chest. He had no evidence, but his gut told him the truth. Something foul lay buried beneath the Benders' orchard. Whispers now grew into open talk. The inn that had once been a place of rest became a place avoided. Travelers gave it a wide berth. Neighbors glanced at the family with suspicion, wondering if the Benders' smiles hid bloodstains. The family, sensing the walls closing in, grew restless. Kate's charm became sharper, more brittle. John's laughter rang louder, more forced. Ma and Pa kept mostly to themselves, glaring at anyone who lingered near the homestead. It was only a matter of time before suspicion turned to discovery, and when the truth came to light, it would horrify the nation and stain the prairie forever with the legend of the Bloody Benders. The prairie had grown restless. Word of missing travelers hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and threatening. Neighbors avoided the Bender Inn, the once bustling stopover now sitting strangely silent on the Osage Trail. Then, one evening in late April 1873, a rider galloped into Independence with news that made men drop their drinks and women clutch their children. The Benders were gone. Their cabin stood eerily empty, the animals unfed, the yard abandoned. Horses and wagons that had once cluttered the yard had vanished with them. To the neighbors it was confirmation. The family had fled like guilty shadows in the night. A search party was quickly formed. Lawmen, settlers, and neighbors, many of whom had lost friends or kin. Colonel York himself was there, grim-faced and determined. They rode out at dawn, the prairie wind sharp against their faces, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the Bender homestead lay. When they arrived, silence greeted them. The cabin sat crooked against the endless plains, the door hanging slightly ajar. Inside, the air was foul, stale with the odor of rot and something metallic beneath it. The curtain still hung between the dining table and the back room, swaying gently in the draught as if mocking them. The men began to search. At first, they found nothing but an overturned chair, a broken teacup, and scattered clothes. Then someone noticed the floorboards near the table. Dark stains had seeped deep into the wood, stains that no amount of scrubbing could erase. "Blood," someone whispered. The room fell silent. The men pried up the boards. Beneath them, the earth was soaked, black and clotted with gore. The stench rose so strong that several gagged and turned away. This was no accident. No spilled wine, no slaughtered animal. This was human blood, gallons of it, pooled beneath the very spot where guests had sat to dine. York's jaw tightened. He pointed toward the orchard. "Dig." They spread out with shovels, striking the earth in grim rhythm. The blossoms shivered above them, white petals falling like snow onto the disturbed soil. Hours passed. Sweat dripped, arms ached, but then the first body surfaced. It was a man, his skull caved in, throat slashed so deep the wound nearly severed him. His clothes were still clinging to him, torn and stiff with blood. The men froze, their faces pale as realization set in. The Benders hadn't been hosts. They had been butchers. Shovels dug faster now, fury mixing with horror. Soon another body was unearthed. Then another, and another. A little girl's form was pulled from the earth, her small frame wrapped in a dress, her head crushed like the others. A hush fell over the diggers, broken only by curses muttered under breath and the sound of spades biting earth. By nightfall, they had uncovered at least a dozen corpses. Among them was Dr. William York. Colonel York fell to his knees beside his brother's remains, his hands trembling as he brushed dirt from the lifeless face. His grief twisted into rage, his voice carrying across the orchard. They murdered them all, every last one who trusted them. The grisly method soon became clear. The Benders had perfected a trap. Guests were seated at the place of honor at the dining table, their backs to the curtain. As Kate charmed them with soft words and promises, Pa or John would creep up behind, delivering a hammer blow to the skull. Then the body would be dropped through a trap door into the cellar, throat cut to finish the deed. When night fell, the corpse would be carried to the orchard and buried beneath the apple trees, fertilizer for fruit sweetened with blood. The men searched the cellar by lantern light. Blood coated the walls. Bits of flesh clung to the dirt. The smell was unbearable, thick and choking. One man ran outside to vomit. Another muttered, "Hell itself couldn't be worse than this place." By the second day, the tally of bodies stood at over a dozen, with whispers of more hidden deeper in the prairie soil. Each corpse told the same story: crushed skull, slit throat, stripped of valuables. Travelers from all walks of life, farmers, merchants, children, had vanished into the Benders' darkness. News spread like wildfire. Newspapers dubbed them the Bloody Benders. Communities shuddered at the thought that such evil had festered unchecked in their midst. The frontier, already dangerous, now seemed haunted by something more terrifying than outlaws with guns, monsters who smiled as they served supper. But as horror turned to fury, another truth sank in. The Benders were gone. Some said they had fled south toward Texas. Others claimed vigilantes had caught and lynched them, bodies left hanging from the prairie trees. A few swore Ma and Kate were seen in the New Mexico territory, practicing their old tricks under new names. But no proof ever surfaced. All that remained was the empty cabin, the blood-soaked ground, and the orchard of shallow graves. The people of Kansas tore the cabin apart, plank by plank, leaving nothing but bare earth. They wanted no trace of the killer's lair to remain. Yet even with the cabin gone, the place was never free of its stain. Travelers spoke of the land as cursed, where the wind carried faint cries and the earth itself seemed to breathe unease. The discovery shocked America. cementing the Benders as the nation's first family of serial killers. They were no longer just peculiar settlers on the prairie. They were legends of terror, whispered about for generations. And still, the question lingered. Where had they gone? Were they rotting in unmarked graves, or had they slipped into the shadows to strike again under different names? The uncertainty was almost worse than the truth. The discovery of the bodies should have brought closure, but instead it birthed something darker, a legend that refused to die. For while the graves of the murdered lay open beneath the Kansas sky, the killers themselves remained phantoms, their fates swallowed by rumor and speculation. In the weeks after the orchard was unearthed, posses scoured the prairie. Men combed riverbanks, searched abandoned cabins, and chased whispers across state lines. Each time they believed they were close, only to find the trail growing cold. The Benders had melted into the vast American frontier, and the frontier was very good at hiding things. Some claimed they saw Pa and John on the Texas border, their German accents thick as they tried to sell stolen horses. Others swore Ma and Kate were spotted in New Mexico, offering spiritual services to grieving families under assumed names. A few insisted vigilantes had caught them, lynched them quietly, leaving their bodies to rot in nameless graves. Yet no one could prove it. This uncertainty gave rise to fear greater than certainty ever could. It was one thing to know a monster was dead. It was another to wonder if it still walked the earth. For the families of the murdered, grief turned to bitterness. Colonel York, though he buried his brother with solemn rites, could not bury the questions. He spent years demanding justice, railing against the failure of lawmen to capture the Benders. But justice never came. Meanwhile, the abandoned land itself became cursed in the minds of locals. Travelers avoided the stretch of prairie. Ranchers refused to graze cattle there, claiming the ground soured their herds. Children dared each other to wander near, whispering that the earth still bled when struck with a spade. On moonlit nights, some swore they saw figures moving among the ghostly orchard, or heard the hammering sound of iron striking bone. The legend of Kate Bender grew most vividly. She had always been the alluring one, the smiling face that lured men to supper. Newspapers painted her as a temptress, a siren of the prairie who mixed beauty with blood. Stories spread that she traveled east, starting anew in St. Louis or even New York, her seances now infamous for drawing curious crowds. Whether true or not, her name became shorthand for evil cloaked in charm. Historians would later argue over numbers. How many victims exactly had been claimed? Some counted a dozen, others 24, still others whispered of more than 30. The truth lay beneath the soil, but the soil kept its secrets. The Benders' story became a symbol of the darker side of the frontier. The Wild West was supposed to be a land of opportunity, where courage carved new lives from open prairie. But the Benders reminded America that the frontier was also a place where law was thin, where the vulnerable could vanish without trace, and where evil could hide in plain sight behind the guise of hospitality. Even in the decades that followed, the mystery resurfaced. In 1889, 2 women were arrested in Michigan, accused of being Ma and Kate. Newspapers exploded with the news, but after months of trial and speculation, the charges collapsed. There was no proof. Another sighting was reported in Montana, another in the Indian Territory, each raising hope, then disappointment. The Benders had become less flesh and blood than ghost and shadow, forever out of reach. What haunted America most was not just the murders, but the unanswered question. How could an entire family conspire so completely in such horror? It wasn't just one madman or one temptress. It was all of them, bound by blood and secrecy. A family that killed together. The orchard itself withered over time. The cabin was dismantled. The wood carted off by neighbors who wanted no relic of evil left standing. Grass grew over the graves, and the prairie winds carried away the scent of rot. Yet the land never shook its name. Locals still call it Hell's Half Acre, a place where nothing good grows. Today, the Benders linger as both history and myth. They are remembered as America's first serial killers, long before the word even existed. They stand as a reminder that evil is not only in outlaws with guns or bandits on horseback. It can wear the face of a family, offering supper and a bed to weary travelers. And so the story endures, passed down in whispers, etched into headlines, revived in books and films. The bloody Benders were never caught, and that truth leaves a shadow long after the graves turn to dust. Because sometimes the scariest stories are not the ones that end with justice, but the ones that end with silence. If you found this story chilling, imagine how many more secrets the Wild West still hides. Don't miss them. Subscribe to the channel, hit like, and share this video so others can uncover the forgotten horrors of the frontier. Your support keeps these untold stories alive.